have the interns anymore. They left the company a little bit ago. Kind of unfortunate. Definitely a demonstration of the overall job market. Of course, we've
Yep.
run internship programs in the past, and the way you don't want it to end, probably the least optimal solution for everybody involved is the internship ends and the people leave. Like you have these people that you've spent 6 months on in your code base and invested 6 months of skill progression in, and you don't want them to leave the company, but that's what happened to us, unfortunately. But it did give me an opportunity to reflect on like boot camps and the um, pros and cons and the value they bring to an organization. Of course, I don't want to say that a boot camp is a like an inopportune way to get a job. I think boot camps have done a really great job with that. But I think that what I noted mostly in this, because of the skill level of my interns, like, and so for this, I can shout out at least one boot camp, and that's Ada. Did a fantastic job, like working through problem solving and thinking through problems and breaking them down and tech stacks and stuff like that. But I think like what we're encountering, you and I, is maybe a contrast to that, where there are so many engineers that are making it through boot camps, um, but haven't been equipped to get a job, like just candidly. And I think maybe that's another way that Ada is different. Uh, and it might lean us into like what should you look for in a boot camp is two things to call out about Ada. One is it's like a year long, so it's not a short boot camp. And two, it did a 6 month intern placement. So you did 6 months of boot camp and then 6 months of internship. That's why it's a year long. And so that was one thing that was different. But like I think like I mean, I don't know. You also had a lot of experience to this with when we spun up CodeGym to kind of start to speak to this, but noting that a lot of the engineers are going through boot camps, they're paying, or these like hopeful engineers going through these boot camps, they're paying lots of money, and they candidly don't seem to be getting the skill set that gives them a job at the end of it.
Yeah. I think there's actually I think there's a couple of things that first of all, I have never heard of Ada until just now. So I'll probably go look into them. But there's honestly a couple of things that I've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed. And first I'll go back to something that somebody once said early on, and you know who I'm talking about. And she said, uh at one point in time, she asked everybody in the room to raise their hands and said, who thinks anybody can be a software engineer? And I
Mhm.
didn't raise my hand because I don't believe that everybody can do this job. Like it takes, you have to think a certain way, but not only think a certain way, because you can always like learn that, but you have to really enjoy solving problems. If you don't enjoy solving problems, if you don't enjoy being frustrated and then that big getting over the hurdle thing, and you don't enjoy doing that day in and day out, you won't last in this very long, right?
Yeah.
You'll get very frustrated and things won't work. So first, I wanted to say that, and I know we as a people are we're intelligent, we can do anything we want. However, um, like at one point in time, my sister-in-law, she was a paramedic, right, or a firefighter, and she told me, she said, you're a veteran, you should go apply to the fire department. I said, yeah, but I don't like helping people like that, right? It's not me. Like I could go learn to do that, but
Yeah.
it's not me, like inside of who I am. I like solving these complicated problems and then moving on to the next one and moving on to the next one. I like problem after problem. It's it's I can sum it up as it's who I am.
Yeah.
So first of all, going back to when this person would ask that, and I countered with, I don't think that everybody can do this job for a long time. Like certain people will do this job for a long time, and other people might say, oh, I can learn that, I can learn code, but it'll be very short lived. It's very similar to, you know we grew up, you see musicians and you're like, oh, I'm gonna go buy a guitar. You buy a guitar, and where does it
Mhm.
sit? It
Yeah.
sits on the shelf, or you buy a stand and it sits on the stand and it's there for like years until we finally sell it, right? I mean, that's what I'm saying, is we could all learn to play guitar, but we don't. you know you have to want it really bad,
Yeah.
and like into your bones. And
You're
so
kind of you're kind of talking about the difference between like can and should, right? Like
yeah.
My dad used to tell me, um, Randy, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So pick something.
Yep.
And I think that's like anybody, I think anybody could, with the amount of investment, time, focus, could learn to program. I think like not everybody should, because like what you're getting at isn't like talent or skill or capability. It's like passion or interest. Like nobody should go into something that they're going to feel is like a dead end, deadbeat, boring job that they're going to get burned out on because it's just not resonating with the thing that they want to do. Like I think a lot about like Dan Pink's definition of motivation is mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And like you could master a skill, you could be able to do it on your own, but if you don't feel purpose, you will not be motivated. And I
Right.
think that's kind of what you're, is that, does that like,
Because, well, I want to stress that it really plays into this, right? So we've seen folks from all different boot camps, and some come out really strong and some come out not so strong, and some went to the same boot camp and they came out strong, and then others. So I want to say is that there's another factor. It's not sometimes in some cases, absolutely, it's the way that the program is structured and the way that how the pace of the
yeah,
program.
okay,
Absolutely. But I want to say first and foremost is that, you know, you know, could you do this? Absolutely. Should you do this? Well, hold on. That's where we need to talk, because again, it does take the type of person that really wants to do this and has that mindset where you have to solve these problems. It's not like, I like solving problems, it's okay. No, I have to solve this problem, right? It's different. And so if you go in like that's the type of person you are, you could go to a boot camp that's structured really poorly and do amazing,
yeah,
because you're not going to settle for just what they're teaching you. You're going to say, I'm hungry and I want more. And
yeah,
so that boot camp is just going to tell you, it's the same thing from like a YouTube video and stuff like that. Um, you can go there and you can get just a little bite, a little taste. And you're like, wait a minute, they mentioned these three other things.
mm-hmm.
They didn't clarify them. Let me go do them because I'm hungry, because I have that attitude. So well, again, I know we wanted to talk about boot camps because there's absolutely there's good ones and then there's not so good ones. I don't want to say that they're bad ones, but you know what? There probably are some bad ones that are only there to take your money,
Yeah,
right? They're only there to take your money. They're like, hey, let's run these people through this, 12-week camp or whatever it is, and we're gonna give them all this information that they could learn for free. We're gonna give them all. We're gonna charge them a bunch of money. We're gonna get people to teach them that just went through the boot camp, the
yeah,
cohort before them. Those are not the people that should be teaching them, because you can't, like, you really can't, and you shouldn't be teaching that if you just learn the basics of the programming language, because the boot camp should be teaching more than just the basics of the programming language. It's how do I actually use the thing, right? How do I actually solve the problem? So Randy, you're like a chemist and all these other things, right?
yeah,
You went to school, and I'm sure you learned a lot of stuff. You could probably go and make me, you know uh you could probably say, hey, I can mix these two things together and it'll do this, therefore I can make this other thing,
yeah,
right? By using logic, using the things that you've learned, and um you can create something new,
yeah,
something different, because you take what you know. And it's very similar with code, right? Like we go and I'm saying we in general, we go and we watch these YouTube videos, or we go through a boot camp and we do this thing. It's like, yes, I did it, but I can't go and do my own version of it. I don't, like, my skills aren't strong enough to where I know how these things work, very similar to like chemistry. They're not strong enough in this case to where I can actually go and build my own thing. And again, this is not particular, or this is not concentrated to boot camps.
yeah,
However, I think boot camps sometimes get a bad rep, and in this case they should, in certain cases, because one, they're taking a lot of money from you, right?
yeah,
And people that are already maybe in a precarious position are hoping to land a job because of this boot camp, right? And I think that's where when if you sense any frustration with boot camps and stuff like that, that's where my frustration is that, man, you paid all this money.
yeah,
And I talk to folks all the time. I went to Render and I talked to some folks that went through boot camps, and it's like, and you can tell that they're still so green in like their understanding of stuff. But I know without asking them that they're carrying this big debt.
Yeah. That's there's a little bit to unpack there. One of the things that I love that you called out is that like it's not so much that like the boot camp is bad, or this person, if they make it through and they didn't like they're not ready. Like sometimes it's not that like the boot camp is bad or the person is bad. It's that the combination of the two is not a good fit. Like coming back to that
Right.
chemistry example, right? Like there's no reaction there. And I also really love that you highlight that like this is a problem solving field. And it comes down to, and you and I see this all the time across our various like networks. It comes down to all of it is kind of encapsulated in the difference in how you express this isn't working. If this isn't working is frustrating fast, this is maybe not the right field
Yeah.
because it is always not working. But if you're like, oh, this isn't working, with curiosity, like if you're curious about the it's not working part, then probably like this is going to work out fine because like you're going to learn something. But like I love that you highlighted that. I just as an aside, I think like the chemistry like analogy is really really relevant. I got really excited when I first came to like tech, and there were so many things like you had atom and proton and all these things named after like chemistry stuff. And I was like, yeah, because it is. It's kind of like you just have a bunch of little like, and then elemental or oh my goodness, I can't think of the name of it. Something design, atomic
Atomic.
design. There we go. I was like, and it's like, yeah, like atoms, you put them together and form molecules. And it's like, oh, I get this. This is a metaphor that is speaking my language because I can come into the field and their atomic design is speaking the language of chemistry. And so now I can kind of understand how to get through this. And that was great. And that helped a ton. And so kind of coming back to boot camps is I think the other thing that you're kind of highlighting is that in some cases, the boot camp is not speaking the language of the individual. And in a lot of cases, I would say that like there's this low effort way to teach tech. And honestly, I don't even need to talk about boot camps to do it. The internet is rife with a low effort means to teach tech, and that is tech that uses tech vocabulary. Um, if all we do is speak this language, we basically like, I mean, if you don't know the language, you don't know the language.
Right.
You may as well be writing it in Sanskrit or something. Um, and I think that there is some of that, but I think at the core of what you're highlighting is that like even if tech is for you, and even if boot camps are a means, and sometimes that's true, it may be that that boot camp isn't right for you, and it's probably worth getting a taste of what this whole field is like before you ever even get into it.
Yeah. I know where you're going with this. And we've talked about this so much like on our own and things like that. So um going back to the combination. Oh man, when you said that, I was like, yeah, that's perfect, right? Because it's the combination has to be right.
Yeah.
It's like, when the stars align, or when the planets align, and the moon, we get this eclipse, right? Because all the conditions are right. Right, all the conditions are right, and then we get this eclipse, and
Yeah.
the sun's blocked out for a little bit. And it's and in that way, things should align in order for you to be uber successful. Now, lots of people do this job and they're not uber successful, and what I mean by that is not they're making a ton of money. I mean that this job becomes like, I can do this in my sleep. I've told you this before. I was like, dude, I could write React in my sleep by this. I could write JavaScript in my sleep at this point. Like I can, and it's not even specific to a language. If I had to go pick up another language like today and I had to solve a problem, I could probably do it really, really quick. It's not because I'm not a rock star developer, but I
No, you're
feel like
amazingly average.
I'm amazingly average. I feel like I'm at this point of success in terms of like I feel really comfortable in this field. I understand, right? It's think about like when Neo was he was like learning the matrix, and all of a sudden, I mean, all of a sudden he's plugged in, he comes out, he's like, I learned, I know kung fu, and he has
Yeah.
this confidence, right? And his confidence builds, and then they're looking at the matrix, and all of and you see like the green, characters come down and stuff like that. They don't even see people anymore. They just see the ones and zeros, right? They just see the binary representation of it. And so what I'm getting at is, you want to be there. It's not about how much money you make. It's about where this job feels like it's not even difficult, right? To actually do stuff. and then you can also teach it to
Right.
someone else. So that's what I mean by successful. That's where you want to be. The combination needs to be right in that I want to do this and I have, knowledge and the ability to gain that knowledge, right, through like a boot camp, through a Udemy course, through YouTube, through
Yeah.
like Udacity, whatever you choose. Like you have to be on this side. You have to say, like, I really want to do this, and I want to call out that I want to do this not because I've heard that it's a lucrative field,
Right.
right? Because that's the worst reason to do this, if I'm being honest, especially with like layoffs. We're not going to get into layoffs and stuff like that, but that has brought the market down in terms of like what companies are willing to pay. So if you're still looking at it that way, that's you shouldn't look at it like that. It's I love to solve problems. There are a ton of problems out there, so I'm going to go into this field because there's so many problems that I die before all these problems
Yeah.
got filled, and that's what I want to do for a living.
Yeah, I want to like double click on the salary thing for just a second. And then mostly because when I was first thinking about software engineering, when I'd hear people say that, it really frustrated me. I was like, why wouldn't you want to do it? Like, what's wrong with wanting to do something for pay? And like, I mean, too long, didn't watch. The answer is nobody is ever going to pay you enough for that you are okay with being miserable.
Yep.
That's it. Like, it's not about like we only want really passionate people that will work long hours. It's that like we should just not compromise our standard of living around that. Like nobody is going to pay you enough to compensate for being miserable because you dislike your job. Like, and I speak with some experience on that. I think
Yeah.
like, um, that's just all there is to it. Is nobody's going to pay you enough to compensate for being like you just pick a number and you say, yeah, I could be. I promise you won't. I promise you can't.
I second that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, nobody's gonna nobody like it sounds great at first, but nobody is going to pay you enough to compensate for being miserable because you hate your job and you spend 8 hours a day doing it. That's a long time to just loathe every second of the things that you are doing.
Yeah. And it's funny because you say we speak from experience. Absolutely. I'm right there with you. I've left jobs in the past that it was the same and it didn't, I mean, they paid really well, but it didn't matter because it at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like it'll weigh on you. So again, not going to beat that to death, but so I want to start and because we said, we talked about like, what's the problem with boot camps?
Mhm.
And I know it's not only boot camps, but I want to like back up and let's say that if we could reach somebody right now, somebody that was pre boot camp, like we can't do anything if you've already went through a boot camp. I mean, we can help you. That's what the server's for. That's for some of the things we're doing is trying to help you get over that hump, right? To actually close those skills gaps. But
Yeah.
imagine that we were reaching, we had even just one person in the audience that was pre boot camp, and they
Yeah.
said, you know what, my friend's an engineer, or I know somebody who's a software engineer, and I heard about this boot camp, right? It doesn't matter whatever city you're in or country you're in, or it's online, it's remote, and you're looking at these different boot camps. There's a couple of questions and a couple of things that I think we've talked about quite a bit that we'd love for someone to do
Yeah.
before they sign on the dotted line.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I sort of snuck this one in a little bit ago. You knew exactly where I was going with this. Like, get a taste of this before
Yeah.
you do it. I have taken to when people come to me, as they do, like I'm in the field, I have a lot of family that's like interested in what I do. They ask me, well, what do you do? I want to do that. How do I start doing that? Without a doubt, I recommend one of two paths pretty much every time now. And I think if you're listening right now and you're like, I think I want to be an engineer, or I'm like pre-engineer and I'm really trying to just go and do a 30-minute tutorial. Like there are two great ones that I'll recommend just buying like explicitly. Free Code Camp has a Flappy Bird in 30 minutes in JavaScript tutorial on YouTube. And MDN has a really great breakout tutorial on their website. Those two, and just go through them. And what I have learned is that like it's not so like I mean, and you've seen this with early engineers, like they kind of fumble stuff. So what inevitably is going to happen is that you're gonna mess something up, and that's okay. Like that's first thing to say is it's okay to like get something wrong and now it's not working. In fact, that's really, really important because that's the entirety of this field. And so go through that tutorial, find when stuff isn't working right, figure out what you did wrong or what you didn't like follow the steps on, fix it, get to the end of the tutorial. And then I always like to emphasize, if you get to the end of that tutorial and you're not so excited about what you've done, you start trying to make some small changes in the application to maybe speed up the ball or create a second level or move the blocks down. If like you're like, okay, that's it, I'm done. What's next? I mean, maybe that's a moment to pause and reflect. Like honestly, like if you're not like trying to extend this to make it your own, like that, the whole idea of like synthesis early, like when we talk about like depth of knowledge, synthesis is one of the highest forms of depth of knowledge in the like teaching. And so like synthesis means I can take the things I've learned and make something new, make something that's my own. That's exactly what you're talking about earlier. So if you go through this 30-minute tutorial or whatever, and at the end of it, you can't make a few small tweaks to synthesize what you learned and made it your own. Either it's maybe time to think and reflect on whether or not you're ready or whether or not you're interested. That's really the key. I think that comes back, whether or not you're motivated or like you feel purpose here. Because if like you're not like, I made a video game, like notice that both of those are video games. I always recommend video games because who doesn't like video games? And so like if at the end of this, you're like, I made a video game and you're not sharing it with people and not trying to modify it, who cares if it's a tutorial that you did in 30 minutes? The point is like, it's yours now. So that's the first thing is I strongly recommend before you even think about paying anybody any money, sit down and write code for 30 minutes. You will definitely run into some of the core features of this field. It's not working like it's supposed to. It's broken. I don't understand this. I need to rewrite this. Like those things are going to happen.
Yeah. I think so I love both of those. And then the other part of that I'll tack on to that is if you can explain it and you're excited to really understand how this works, that's another part of this is so I know some folks, you go through a tutorial wherever it is, and then it's like, great, you did this thing, and then somebody asks you, or I do this all the time. Cool, how does it work?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't explain to me how it works, and you're not like even the slightest bit interested in how it actually works, then that also could be time for you to pause and say, is this really what I want to do? Because like learning how something actually works, understanding how things actually work are going to set you up for success later on.
Yeah.
That success, which is this doesn't feel like a job anymore. This feels like super easy. Like I can write this code and other people are struggling with it. That's that's part of that. So if you go build that, like, and I 100% agree, go build something that's inconsequential, right? Go build a game.
Yeah.
And if you're not super excited at the end of it, and then you can't also explain how it's doing that, if you're not either of those things, you maybe, again, just maybe this isn't what you really want to do. I love that, right? I did a Flappy Bird game by this guy on YouTube. I found it and it was like one of the best Flappy Bird. It's not a free code camp. This is just another guy on YouTube. And yeah, and he did it, and the way he explained it, he structured it as everything I wish I knew, or if there was a YouTube video when I started, this is that video. And so I watched it and I was like, man, this guy just taught it really, really well, super succinct. He broke down everything, and I built the game, and I, of course, had to go add some stuff. So I put music in the background. I went and found some like energetic music, like dubstep kind of music, and then I added a storyline to it where I called it Revengey Bird, and where there's this, there's this whole story where the bad guy has taken the bird's family, and but like these things are just so exciting to me, right? And they drive me, and I'm a huge believer that code should be fun. It's not always fun, but I got into this because it's fun. I mean, the first couple of years, I think most of us in the very beginning, we're not getting paid for a long time.
Right.
But if you find yourself continuing to do it, maybe this is the field for you because you're doing it for free, right? Like, man, I wrote apps in the morning, apps in the first couple of years, and I made $0, Did some websites for some folks, made $0, but oh man, I was just pumped. Like, you see, that little baby doing the fist pump when the thing works, when you get over
Yeah.
that problem, and it's like, then you got the next problem, and you're like, yes, I'm on to the next problem. It's super exciting, and it drives me. Um, and so the other question that I like to ask people, which goes along with this, right? So you're pre-engineer, maybe pre-boot camp, um, and you go build a Flappy Bird game. The other part of this for me is ask yourself why. Why
Hmm.
do I want to do this?
Yeah.
Very, very similar to like picking up an instrument. Why do you want to play this instrument? Hey, it looks cool, right? Guitarists look
Yeah.
really cool. They're out there headbanging. They got their long hair, right? That I grew up in the like the 80s and the 90s, so I grew up
Yeah.
listening to a lot of like metal music. And when I picked up a guitar, I loved the sound. It wasn't the image, it was what I could do with it, right? It's a tool
Yeah.
essentially that allows you to create. And I played guitar for like 7.5 years straight. Um, and I felt like I got pretty good. Like, I could play almost anything, and I started making original music and all that stuff. And it just lent itself so well to when software fell in my lap.
Hmm.
When writing code, programming language fell in my lap, was that it was a tool for me to be able to be creative. And I started by doing other things, and then I started building my own things. Very similar path.
Yeah.
I think for me, that's a really important question. Is why do you want to do this? I ask that to anybody who's like interested. Why do you want to do this?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I also love that you highlighted something else. Like, there's two things that I kind of hear in your story. And one is that there's nothing more human in the act of creation. Like, we are a creative species. And so if like you do something and you don't feel the urge to create, like it's not resonating. Like that's like it's potentially not resonating. And then the other thing that I love that you highlighted, it's maybe just tangential. She talked about like guitar. I played guitar for a long time too. We both know that about ourselves, but maybe our audience doesn't, and still have a guitar sitting over in the corner over there. But like you mentioned that you played guitar for a certain amount of time straight. And the other thing that I think about is like how, everything kind of has a season. And like, I don't actively play guitar, but that means that I still had to fulfill that creative urge. And similar to you, like almost immediately after I learned to play guitar, I didn't spend a lot of time, like I can't play Wonderwall, but I immediately started to like try to write my own songs, right?
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to be creative with it. And that's also why I like can play this jazz piano, which we won't get into that too much, but because I just wanted to be able to create. Like I didn't really
Yep.
care about scales or any of that, and bang on the keys and see if it sounds good. Which is also how I program. But uh, but yeah, I think that that's the other thing. Is like thinking about like, we think a lot about like high performance sports and stuff like that, and like those folks are not doing that for their whole lives. And I think it's probably really reasonable for us to think about our own lives in that same way. Like you and I have talked at length on this podcast about like life after programming or life after
Yep.
engineering. Right before we got on, I kind of talked to you about how like the engineering part of my day is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Uh, like not even part of my day anymore. It's like more part of my week. Um, and thinking about that in terms of like, I'm going to do this for a while, but I'm not going to do it forever. And so like starting with that right up front, I think is really reasonable. But I think like getting a why, like understanding your purpose is, who is it that wrote the book Start With Why? Like you really, I think that's Simon Sinek actually. Uh, but like really driving into that. And I think that's really key and really important. And those are questions we want them to reflect on themselves. But I also want to recommend that there's questions that they should ask their boot camp. Like ask the boot camp, like questions like, you know, is there a capstone? Is there a project that is going to ask of me as a new engineer to build something from nothing? Not a tutorial project, not a guided project. Like I think that's a really important question that resonates with what we're saying because that's most of what we do. I also think it's really important to ask like how much time will I spend in someone else's code base? Like a brownfield old code base, because like most of us are not doing greenfield work. And if you want to be successful in this industry, like, you have kind of like three types of engineers, right? You have the engineer that comes into the code base and they hate it and they want to just rewrite everything. But that's almost never feasible. And then you have the engineer that never wants to rewrite anything. And you have somebody that's right in the middle, like the engineer that's their code basically. They've been there for
Right.
15 years or whatever, and it's perfect, and we shouldn't rewrite any of it. We should all just follow the existing patterns that are in the code base and don't think about it. Like, just do what's there. And then you have the folks that are able to make meaningful shifts in the way that the code is written and designed, and the model that it represents, right? And like, we want engineers to be that second group. Like, you shouldn't have to rewrite everything to understand it. And you shouldn't be averse to rewriting things that you wrote before. But like, I think like that's really key in a boot camp, because your first job out of college, out of a boot camp, you're going to be changing someone else's code. I guarantee it. Like, you're not going to be hired straight out of college to build it from scratch. I mean, maybe you are. I think it's very unlikely. Most likely, you're going to be modifying somebody else's code.
Yeah. I think I've been almost everywhere in there in what you mentioned. That was a time where I wanted to like rewrite all the code. And
Yeah.
and I felt justified in it. Like it needed to be refactored. It goes back to the last time we recorded, we talked about, make the change easy and then
Mm-hmm.
make the easy change.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that is necessary, or that, changing stuff helps facilitate the easy change. Um, but ultimately, if I was to like leave, anybody listening with this, is if you know somebody that's like, hey, I'm looking into boot camps, right? I want to do this
Mm-hmm.
thing. Um, or yourself, I'm not here to talk you out of it. Like, we're not here to talk you out of it,
Right.
but we just love to ask you some questions,
Yeah.
right? I mean, ultimately, I don't want anybody to be stuck with, 10, 15, $30,000 in debt. And then, they're struggling for 6 months, a year, 2 years to land that job. So, reach out and just let us ask you some questions.